recording. Okay, good. So my name is Josh Long. I am the Spring Developer Advocate for Pivotal. By the way, these slides are online. People always ask me, where can I get the slides? They're amazing. I love the slides. I married my wife with the slides. They're that good. I keep the slides under my pillow. People say this to me, and I say, okay, I understand. You want the slides. They're online. If you need them, they're there. Now, I am Josh, as we talked about before. I work for Pivotal, right? If you have questions, if you have ideas or feedback, please take this. And actually, I'm on WeChat, so add me, and we'll make it work there as well, okay? Whatever. So good. So I am the author of 5 books on Spring, 3 videos. I am a contributor to Spring Boot and Spring Cloud and Spring Integration and Spring Batch and several Spring technologies. I'm a Java champion, speaker around the world about this stuff. And yet, I really wanted to come here. I'm actually in China to give a keynote lecture at the Arch Summit in Shenzhen. So I was like, oh, great, okay, I have a reason to go to China. So as soon as I went there, I said, I'm going to go to Shanghai for, my visit in Shenzhen is like 2 days. But then I came straight to Shanghai, and I've been spending a week here. So I can speak to people like you who are building amazing apps using Spring, right? People here in China are doing amazing, amazing things. And I know that, right? I don't know if you, a few of you may remember I was here years ago. Spring, scale. Nope, haha, just kidding. JK. Okay, Spring at China scale, right? And so this is the blog that was published a few years ago after my visit with you all here in 2012, right? So I got to talk to some of you. I really couldn't believe the amazing things you were doing. Amazing. You guys are changing the world, and you're doing it in a way that the rest of the world has not yet understood, right? But you're not the only ones. I mean, you are certainly a very select, small group. It's a small group, but you're not the only ones. There's Netflix in the West. There's Baidu. There's actually I spoke to C-Trip, which is now moving to Spring and so on. So they're doing amazing things. And Tencent, lots of Spring there as well. Huge, huge companies. So I'm very interested in these use cases. Of course, I work for Pivotal. How many of you have heard of Pivotal? Pivotal it's a small startup. We started in 2013 after I was here last time. And it's the home of Spring, right? And then RabbitMQ, Tomcat, Redis, Cloud Foundry, etc. So Cloud Foundry is a platform as a service. It's designed to optimize for the continuous delivery of applications, right? We care about moving fast without cutting ourselves, without hurting ourselves. And everything we do at Pivotal is all about agile. It's all about being faster and safer at scale. And so we've tried to build a solution stack optimized for that. And of course, a big part of that is how do you build applications that live in the cloud, right? If you build applications that live in the cloud, you introduce complexity because they have to be distributed. So we wanted to find ways to support these kinds of patterns. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is Spring Boot, which is a great way to build an application or a service, and then Spring Cloud, which is a great way to build a distributed system. And that's where I think we have an opportunity to talk. So that's the end of the slides. Oh well. So now, there's several ways to get started. Come on, internet. Good. So you can go to start.spring.io, keep it as a bookmark, maybe keep it under your pillow. If you have a child, you can read this to the child to go to sleep. I mean, it's a very good website, lots of benefits, many, many options. There's also a more programmer-friendly, like more nerd-ready, so start.spring.io. And that's the same interface, the same experience, except through the power of curl, right? Because I know we all care about curl, so this is there. I want them to build a telnet interface, but I don't think they will. Anyway, so you can get started that way. You can also use something called the Spring CLI. I don't know if you have seen this. We have a command line tool now. So I can say hi.groovy. Oh, did you hear that? Yes. So good. Okay, so do. Don't save. So I'm going to say at REST controller class greetings REST controller, and I'll say def hi path variable, and I'm using Spring MVC here, right? I'll just say name, and this is just Groovy, the Groovy language. You don't have to use it, but I like it. It's a very powerful language, and the CLI makes it even simpler. So I can say request mapping hi, name, etc. Right? And the benefit of this is now I've got a simple idea, and I can go to command line. I can say spring run hi.groovy, and what that's going to do is it's going to look at the script, and it's going to see, oh look, you've got a type called REST controller. It's resolvable. It's in this package. I can import it, so it adds the dependency to the class path. So now I've got an application running on port 8080. Right. So there you go. On port 8080. Sorry. There you go. So very, very simple example, but it does work, right? And I know you are saying, well, that's terrible, Josh. You're cheating. That's not what we expect, right? I can't deploy that, and I agree. So you can say hi.jar, hi.groovy, and what that will do is it'll create a jar, and then you can just run it like this, right? That's much simpler to manage, much simpler to deploy. My grandpa can deploy that, right? He has applets on his computer. He can deploy it, right? So there's the same thing again, right? So very, very simple example, very easy to deploy. So that's one way to get started. It's using Groovy. Maybe you don't want to use Groovy, that's fine. But I like to show people that because this is a very important metric in the enterprise software community, which is if I take this code, can I tweet it? Now, I don't know if you know about the West. In the West, we have something called Twitter. In Twitter, it can only be 140 characters or less, right? So, very important. Can I make it tweet? Yes, I can. Right? There you go. I can tweet my REST service. Can you tweet your REST service? No. No, you can't. No. It's because I'm awesome. You can be too. So, this is not the most important metric of good software, but I think it does help, right? It helps to understand that this stuff shouldn't be hard. If you hear an annoying Node.js developer complaining about how Java is verbose, show them that, because now it's better, right? And of course, obviously at Pivotal, we have a cloud. So if you're running on a cloud, obviously you can do cf push -p hi.jar, hi, and then that'll be running in a cloud in some minutes. I'm not going to do it here because I don't know if my local cloud is running or if I'm running a remote one. But the point is, this is now something that would be in production very quickly, right? Not a particularly great app, but it's moving quick. Conceptually, things that are simple should be very simple in code. That's what we care about, okay? Now, I'm going to close this. Goodbye to that. Goodbye to my tweetable REST service, all that extra code I wrote for you. We're going to use the Java version, of course, okay? So you have choices here. You can say, okay, what kind of group do I want to do? What is the artifact ID, my Maven artifact? So I will choose, let's build a reservation service. It's going to be a service to manage objects of type reservation. And then I will choose several things, Maven or Gradle. Oh, I see. Okay, good. So I will choose Maven or Gradle. If it's, I don't know, are you using Maven? Gradle? Ant? Okay, please don't say Ant. Oh.
Because Tomcat is built on top of us.
Okay, you get a pass, and I'm sorry. But the rest of us. So Maven, you can choose a project or a build, okay? Then you have two choices, jar or war, okay? Now, if you are, by accident, stuck, trapped in the distant past, 2000, unable to move forward in time to progress to the future, where in this case the future is the present, if you are stuck in that past and you can't go forward, then you should choose war. Okay? This is for that story. But since everyone here is in this room with me today in 2015, then you should choose jar. Again, if you are stuck in the past, choose war. Sometimes, like in the movies, people travel back in time and they cannot go forward. That's why we have this option. It's for those people that are in the Back in Time episodes on TV. Okay? This is for today. So we're going to choose jar. This is part of my personal philosophy of make jar, not war. Okay? Peace. Now, you can choose Java or Groovy, whatever you want. I'm going to choose 1.30 M2 right now. Later, I'm going to go back to 1.25. Okay? I want to show you a few of the great features in 1.30 M2 Spring Boot. But when I introduce Spring Cloud, I need to use something stable, so I'll go back, okay? So just understand, later on I'm going to refactor my build just a little bit. So I'm going to choose that because I can. And by the way, notice that these are version specific. So if I go down to here, you know, things disappear on the right. Right? So here I'm saying 1.30 M2. Look at all those new features, okay? Now I'm going to build an application, and I'm going to say I'm going to build a web application. Great. I'm going to use JPA because I make bad life decisions. Now, if I didn't make bad life decisions, maybe I would use something else. But since I'm lazy, here's what we're going to get, okay? Again, life, you can use Mongo or Redis or Gemfire or whatever. I'm going to use REST repositories because I can. I'm going to use Timeleaf, again, because I can, for server-side generated HTML. It's not a very common use case, but why not? Right? I'm going to use an embedded database because I'm lazy, and this is a demo. But you can use any database, of course. I'm going to use the config client just because I want that. I'm going to choose actuator and the remote shell for operations concerns, okay? So again, we're trying to remove things that we don't care about. Sorry?
So should we choose dev tools for development?
This doesn't help in my demo, but what it does is it turns on features like live reloading. Ooh, somebody was asking about that. Yeah, it doesn't turn on. It's not JRibble. What it does is we found out that some of the biggest slowness is actually just starting the JVM itself. So if you start the JVM and then just throw away the Spring container, it's super fast. It's almost instantaneous. So you can hit Command F9. The dev tools will monitor your local classes, and it'll throw away the Spring container and just recreate it all. And it's actually very fast for modern apps. A lot of the slowness is just starting the JVM. Once you've done that, it's fast. So I could use that if I wanted, but in my case, I'm going to be adding things. This is much better for later on after you've already got your builds, your compiled stuff. I have to restart anyway because I'm going to add libraries. Just to show you that I can, I'll choose Vaadin. You would never use this. I understand. I'm not trying to tell you to use Vaadin. I'm trying to show you that it's very easy to do amazing things quickly. Okay. So, okay, good. Now I'm going to hit generate. Hit download, and what I have here, Command A, oops, goodbye, do that again, show in Finder, Command Z, good, get rid of all this. So there's my reservation service. It's a simple web application, and I'm going to go ahead and remove most of the dependencies that I've just added. By the way, are you Eclipse? No? IntelliJ is the one person who always uses NetBeans here. There's always one person who's like, no, I want NetBeans. Okay, well, it works in NetBeans as well. By the way, before I get started, we have to take care of something super important. Can you say, Jiaz? Okay, here we go. Okay, thanks, guys. So now, this is loading all of the dependencies from the future. Here we go. This version of Spring Boot just came out like a few days ago, so I haven't gotten the dependencies. Come on, faster. There we go. Your Wi-Fi is good. So here's my build. Now this is a regular Maven build, of course, but it has a parent starter POM. Okay, so if you're trying to move to the new version of Spring, all you do now is you say bring in Spring Boot 1.3 or 1.25, and it brings in everything else for you. It manages those versions for you wherever possible. It's just Maven, so you can change it, but it's really nice because if you go to Spring Boot dependencies, you can see, oh look, I've got ActiveMQ, Antler, Artemis, AspectJ, Commons, DBCP, the pool, you know, Glassfish, Elasticsearch, Groovy, JSON, Hazelcast, Hibernate, Jaybird, JDOM, Jetty, Jolokia, JSON, Log4j, Mongo. All these things are managed for you. It's not everything, but it's common. It's the stuff that we are willing to say that our framework integrates with, right? So all the Spring projects too. So if you want to use Spring MVC and Spring Batch and Spring Data and Spring whatever, and they use common libraries, we set them, we level them. We play whack-a-mole. There are people on the Spring team who are bald, no hair, because of this. They do it for you, right? So now the benefit is that you can go to your build and just say, oh, I want to build an application, and I want only what is required to be productive using JPA. Okay, so I'm going to do that. There's everything I need for JPA. Okay, again, I don't have any version. This code, this dependency has no code. It just brings in other jars. Yeah. So if I go to here, you can see it's all this craziness. But remember, there's no code in these except for that one. No code. Just build. It's just a POM that brings in other dependencies, right? So all it's doing is it's bringing in Spring, it's bringing in Spring Data, it's bringing in all of the Hibernate crap, it's bringing in Tomcat for the connection pool, right? It's bringing in all the stuff that you need. XML, DOM, just a transaction API, all that stuff. So there you go. Now I've got a very simple build. Let's go to our application. And the example I always use is that of a reservation, right? So we're going to say class reservation. And a reservation is sort of like when you go to a restaurant, you call them and say, oh, I want to have 2 tables at 8 o'clock. It's a reservation. Something very simple. I don't actually care about the domain. I just wanted something to type. Okay, so I'm going to say private string reservation name. And we're going to say at ID, at generated value. And we'll say at enter, at entity. Okay. And there you go. And I'm going to now get all the dependencies, do a constructor, another constructor for Java, right? So there's just a basic entity. Again, I know most of us do contract first, but I want an entity, okay? So that's fine. And you know this is JPA. These columns will be saved to a database. Then I can use Spring Data, right? So Spring Data is a way of persisting things to a database, but it provides this repository abstraction. A repository is a design pattern. It says, okay, here's an object that handles creating, reading, updating, deleting. It's good for unit testing because I don't have SQL code tied to a data source. It adds a middle layer between your actual code and the thing that's writing to the physical persistent store, which is great for persistence. So now, of course, I'm using JPA, but I could use Mongo repository. I could use Cassandra or React or Couchbase or Neo4j or Redis or Gemfire or like 10 more. Aerospike, I mean, there's a whole bunch more, right? I forgot them all. So I'm going to do that. This interface provides methods like find all giving a sorting condition, a page condition, flush, delete. Here's, sort, page, right? All of these methods are provided in the interface. And I don't implement the interface. I will never write the code because it's boring code. It's dumb code. If you close your eyes, you can see find by ID equals select all from X where ID equals whatever. It's boring code. Don't write that code, right? So we do it in this for you. Even better, I can do custom finder methods. I can say find by reservation name, string rn, okay? And this will generate a query that looks like this. Select all from reservations where reservation name equals rn, okay? Very, very basic. And of course, I can override this. I can say at query. So, whatever. So this is just Spring Data. But again, I'm going to use it and I don't want to worry about it. Now, I'm going to build an application that uses my repository. So I'm going to build a command line runner. A command line runner in Spring Boot is an interface that is a callback. If you implement the interface, Spring Boot will call the method and it will pass public static void main string arguments. Okay? It's good for back office, integration, ETL, cron, anything that isn't specific to the web, right? It's a callback. And so any bean can implement that interface and they get this. Okay? So I'm going to say return new command line runner. That's fine, right? Are you using Java 6? 7? 6? Oh,
Now we try Java 8.
Java 8 is so good. Java 8 is the best. Oh, you should go. So I'm going to use Java 8 just to make you feel bad. Sorry. So here's Java 8. There's a feature in Java 8 for lambdas. Have you seen the new feature? And it's kind of basic. It lets you take an interface like this one, which has one method, and you can write it as a lambda. Because what I'm trying to do is to express this as a function. I'm trying to tell Spring, call this function. I have to have an object because Java requires it, but an object is for state. I have no state. I'm just trying to call a function. So if you take away the fat, it's just this function. So you can write it like that. You can say, listen, I don't want to actually create an object of type command line runner. I just want to call the run method. So command line runner, CLR, and then of course I can strip all that away. I can say, well, I don't need that. I don't need this, and I don't need that. And since it's being coerced, it's being made into an object like this, it knows this type as well. So I don't even need that, right? And since there's only one argument, I don't need the parentheses either. So now I can just say return that, right? Very, very nice. This is a feature that's very modern. Only modern languages like Java have it. Java, C, C++, COBOL, Lisp, Smalltalk, Perl, Python, PHP, Ruby, F#, C#, Scala, Groovy, Doobie. Only modern ones. Only modern languages have this feature, like those last 40 years or so. So now I want to inject an object. I want to use an object in my code. And this is just like in Java, in the XML. Are you using Java configuration? No? Are you using XML configuration?
Yes.
So in the XML, you can say bean class equals blah, 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 command line runner, ID equals demo. That's what's happening here, right? And I'm going to inject a reference. I'm going to say, Spring, give me a bean of type repository. So that's what's happening. I'm declaring that bean. And the nice thing about lambdas in Java 8 is that even though this used to be in Java 6 or 7, I would have to say final, right? Because this is kind of like an anonymous inner object. Now, I don't have to. I can just declare it. So I'm going to define a bean using this. This bean annotation will be picked up by Spring. Any class that has @configuration on it will be picked up. This annotation here, Spring Boot application, is also a configuration class. Okay, so that's why that works. This annotation, I told the people on the Spring team, and nobody listens to me. I don't know why. I told them, listen, I have an idea. We can do better. We should rename this. We should name it I want to go home early. Now, nobody listens. I tried. I thought this would have been a better name, but they didn't listen. Whatever. So now I have a regular bean, and I'm telling Spring, okay, I want to call this bean, and I want to do some data. I want to do some insertions. So Josh, son, names. Help me with the names, friends. Name, somebody.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, more. What?
Smith.
Huh?
Smith. Smith.
Smith. Sorry. Okay. So there's 4 names. I'll say for each x rr.save new reservation x. Okay. So I'm saying create a list, and then for every name x in the list, call this method using the lambda, right? Again, all I'm doing is just saying new consumer, and then doing that, right? But I think it's much nicer as a lambda. So that's what it's actually doing. But as a lambda, it just becomes this. Much nicer. Now, okay, good. I have the data in the database. Now I want to actually read the data. I'm going to say find all, find by reservation name, and I'll say son, and then I'll say for each, and I'll say system, I'll say for each R, for each reservation, system out dot println reservation. But of course, if you look at the code, that's a little bit wasteful, because all I'm doing is I'm creating a lambda to call another method. Why not just call the method directly? Why not just invoke that? So I can use a method reference now in Java 8. to say, look, call that method directly. So for each R, call print9, okay? And then of course down here I'll do rr.findAll for each. Good. So now I'm going to run this code, and I'll take some coffee. Here we go. So this is going to work. I mean, of course it's going to work, right? There's my data. Oh, that's sad. It didn't work. I failed. Sorry. Awkward. Okay, so there it is. There's my data, right? The first is just someone by himself, and then there's everybody all together, right? So a very, very simple example. Of course that worked. I don't make mistakes. Maybe you do, but me, no. So this is not what I wanted to show you, right? What I really wanted to focus on was this. Now, this ASCII artwork is beautiful. There are 2 doctors on the Spring team. Nuclear physicists, PhDs, I'm not kidding. In their previous lives, they worked with high energy physics and nuclear physics. Super smart people. And then they decided that they really wanted to help the world, so they worked on the Spring project. But it makes me very happy to imagine one day they received a GitHub issue saying, we need good ASCII artwork. Look at this ASCII artwork, it's beautiful. Just gorgeous. You can change the ASCII artwork, but why would you want to? Right? And there is a feature in IntelliJ, and normally IntelliJ makes a very good product, but I have to take issue with this new feature. I think we should complain. What is this? Why are you here? I didn't even invite you. This is the dumbest feature I've ever seen. So I think we should complain, maybe get them to get rid of it. Anyway. So okay, that worked. Great, you know. Now, what I really want is I want to build a, this is just an application talking to a database. It's very pointless, I'd much rather build a modern web application. So I'm going to, I've already got Spring Boot Start a Web. I've already got that here. So I could have just, yeah. So now I'm going to build a REST endpoint, okay? So, of course, it's very simple to build REST. You are doing something slightly different, but it's the same idea. So I'll say REST derivation, REST controller. And I'm going to do something terrible, something you should never do, even when you're all by yourself at home and no one is looking. I'm going to use field injection, okay? Don't do this. You should use a constructor, because every time you do field injection like this, a unit test dies. A terrible death. So again, I don't have a lot of space on my screen, but if I did, I would do this. That's much better, okay? Much cleaner. So there we go. And I'm going to say request mapping, and I'm going to say, method equals get, and I'll say value equals reservations, and I'll say collection of reservations, and I'll say return this dot reservation repository dot find all. Okay, and there you go. It's a simple REST endpoint. I'm going to start it up now. It's just going to return all the data, which is not a very useful thing to do in production, but it does work, right? So now if I go to, what am I doing? Command T, reservation, nope, haha. There you go. I've got a pretty printing plugin, obviously, but if you look at the output, it's much more natural. This is the data, and this is my plugin. That's what's happening. So, okay, simple, right? I mean, but this is way too much work. I just wanted you to see how easy it was to use the REST support. There's actually a much better way, right? So we have in this case, all I'm trying to do is take my HTTP service and then map to creating, reading, updating, deleting. Well, that's what REST is, right? So I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to bring in my Spring Data REST dependency, and I'll go back to my code, comment that out for now. We don't need it for now. And I'm going to go back to my repository, and I'll say REST repository resource, and then I'll run it again. And what that's going to do is it's going to take my repository. Oops, I failed. I want to do one more thing. I want to annotate this at param rn. There we go. Now I'm going to run it again. Okay, so now if I go back to here, this is my old API. Here's the new one, right? And this is hypermedia, HDOS, hypertext as the engine of application state. It's this idea that every REST response should have metadata that can be used by the client to understand related information, to understand what to do with that information. So here, you see this all the time if you use HTML. You say link rel equals text CSS, source equals x.css, right? That link tells the client, the browser, that there's a document called x.css, and the reason that document is important is because it's a style sheet to style the document. Here, we're saying this is a payload of all the reservations. This link points to self, so this is how to get back to myself. Here's the search endpoint. Its relevance is that it's a search endpoint. Here's the URL, the source. Here's all the data itself, right? And there's links for each one of those as well, right? So now if I go to here, I say reservations 1, and you see there's, all the data is there, 3, etc. I can go to the search endpoint like we talked about before, and there's my search endpoint, find by reservation name, right? So I can click on this, and I say find by reservation name RN equals son, and there's just that one record here, and the links about that record. Even better, if I go back to reservations, I can say page equals 1 and size equals 1. So I'm saying page 1, size 1, and it shows me first, previous, the current one, next, last, right? So I get paging all out of the box, and there's the one response. I can also, I can do size equals 3 and sort equals reservation name, right? So, page 2, page 0. So Jack, Josh, Smith, right? Okay. So this is all very basic. It's REST. Now, any kind of modern application would, of course, have any kind of old application will, of course, have some sort of MVC controller. So do you do server-side MVC? No? Is it all just JavaScript on the client? Or do you actually have any server-side generated HTML? Like JSP pages? Free marker, velocity, time leaf?
Velocity.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to build a regular old server-side generated thing, okay? So I'll say reservations, MVC controller, and I'll say at autowired private reservation repository, and I'll say request mapping, and I'm going to build a URL here for something that I would never ever do in production. I'll say reservations.php page, and I'll pass in the model attribute there, and I'll say return reservations, and I'll say model.addAttribute reservations, right? So there you go. Very, very simple. And I'm going to render a template, and the template has to live wherever it wants, but by default, Spring Boot will look for it here in the source main, templates directory. What is this thing doing? I can't select. That is so weird. I broke IntelliJ. Okay. You're not supposed to go too fast, otherwise it gets weird. Darn it. Okay, so I've purged memory. So delete. Pom.xml. I'm going to go back and add timeleaf now. So timeleaf is just one way to do server-side generated HTML. You can do many, of course, add auto import. So I'm using timeleaf. There's also Groovy templates, mustache. There's velocity. There's free marker. There's I'm missing a couple more, but whatever. So timeleaf is the one I'm going to use. Timeleaf is really nice because it's server-side HTML, but it's also natural. You can actually take it in a browser and then render it. You know how it is with like JSP or something where you take the template and you give it to the designer, and then the designer gives you the finger and threatens your family, and they leave a bag of poop on fire in front of your house. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever had that? No? Just me? Fine. So reservations.html, very simple. I'm going to go to here and I'll say cat desktop old beautiful applications demo source main resources templates reservations. That's a lot. There. So there's my natural template. I'm saying for each reservation R in the reservations model attribute, print this out. Great. Nothing fancy. I just want to do a template. And of course, if I want to serve HTML directly, I can say new file here. Hi.html. Okay. Right. So there we go. Now I can run the application. Nope. I can run the application. It's going to start up. It'll see that I've got static templates here just to be sent to the client directly. So images, style sheets, JavaScript, all that goes there. And then the server-side generated templates will be in the templates directory. Now here we go. I go back to here and I say, oh look, reservations.php. There's my thing. Right? Very, very simple. Again, I'm not a designer, so all that's still working. And just to show you that you can do like almost anything, I'm going to use a third-party library here called Vaadin. Now Vaadin is a weird web framework. It's pretty cool, I guess, for intranet departmental kind of things like Visual Basic. And the idea is that you can program user interfaces using GWT, right? But unlike GWT, you don't do all the state synchronization. So the events happen on the server, but the widgets are on the client, okay? So this is Vaadin Spring Boot Starter. And now I can go here and I can say that I want to move my repository to a separate type because it needs to be public for this to work. And then I need to remove my entity as well. So I'm going to make these classes public. Okay. And then this as well, and I'll say public. And actually, if it's public, I don't even need that. And now I go back to my code and I say, let's build a user interface. And I'll say at Spring UI at theme volo. Okay. Public static class Spring UI extends UI. Okay, init, and I'll say table t equals new table t dot set. Come on, that one. Set container, and I'll say new bean item container, and I'll say reservation. I'm going to pass in reservation.class, and I'll give it this dot. I'm going to inject my repository again, reservation repository, and I'll say this dot reservation repository dot find all, and then I'm going to say set content is t, and I'll say t dot set size full, set size full, and that'll expand it. And again, this is not very interesting. It's just sort of demonstrating how easy it is to do this. And I'll say, what is that? I don't know. Value, path. What do you want from me? Reservation UI. Path. There. So, okay, so now I've got that. I'm going to rerun again. Again, will you do all this in one app? Probably not. But it just goes to show you it's very easy. Okay, so now up and running. This is that, of course. But if I go to UI, I get this table sorting and all that stuff, Whatever. I don't care. The point is not to show you that you should do this. It's just that you can, right? This is all very easy to pull together things and not worry about configuration, right? And this is a third-party project. We didn't write the code. It's not something we care about. It's the third thing, right? So now I've got an application. It is pretty obvious, I think, that Spring Boot is as productive as Ruby on Rails or Laravel or Django or whatever, right? If you're looking at other programming technologies and you're wondering how to be more, have more velocity, I think you can agree that Spring Boot is pretty good, right? What I've shown you here is much different compared to what Spring is normally, what it's like to use Spring normally, right? My configuration, I have almost no configuration, right? But this is not what I'm, this is not really what it means to build an application today, right? If we talk about being agile, delivering features is fun, but that's not how you go to production. You have to also integrate with production. There are a lot of cross-functional requirements, right? Cross-functional requirements that stop you from going to production. Things that you need to be able to see what is happening with the application, to be able to audit it for security, to have visibility and monitoring and all that. And so to support those use cases, we want to bring in the Spring Boot actuator, that's this right here, and then the Spring Boot remote shell, that's that right there, okay? And then you can restart. Okay. And what that's going to do is it's going to set up my application. So just as before, I can call the reservations endpoint. I'm going to make a lot of requests. Okay, lots and lots of requests. And then I go to reservations 1, and I go to .php, go to UI, I guess. Right, so there's that. Got to go to reservations some more. Whatever, right? I'm making requests. Now I can go to metrics and I can see, oh look, I've got this much memory free, this many processors, this much uptime, this much heap, this many threads, these many classes loaded, this many sessions, the data sources. I can say, oh look, you made one request to reservations.php and it had a status code of 200. You made 2 requests to UI and it had a status code of 200, etc. Okay, so this gives me ideas about what has happened. Now I can go to trace, and this is not the same as distributed tracing, which we talked about earlier, so I understand that the name is not great, but anyway, so now I can say, oh look, trace. It says I made this method, I made a call into the system at this UTC date, HTTP GET / metrics. Here are the request headers and the response headers for all the requests, right? Now by default, this is in memory. And also notice that it's hypermedia as well, right? This is in memory by default. It's limited to 100 entries. But you can write it, you can configure that, you can override it, you can have it written out to something like Kafka, you can do whatever you want, okay? I can go to env, and it shows me the environment of my application. So here are the system Git properties, right? Your Java environment, as well as your system shell environment, right? So it says, oh look, my password is this one right here, but it's secret, it's a mask, right? Same thing for key, same thing for secret, same thing for, what else do I have? What's a good one? Password, that's also hidden. So anything that's hidden is hidden, right? These are my environment variables. I can go to mappings and I can say, oh look, my MVC application exposes these endpoints. For example, reservations.php is in this class right here. And it is, it doesn't tell me anything else, but for example, error, we give you a generic stock error page, right? And that error page is automatically stood up here. It produces text HTML, and it's handled by this component. I can see that the beans endpoint calls HTTP GET, or requires HTTP GET, for example. So you get all of the information that we can tell you about the publicly exposed services and endpoints, okay? So again, produces application JSON. It tells you that, right? So you know that as well. This is empty. Info is empty, right? There's a link, but there should be data there. The data is up to you. You can provide whatever you want. A very common thing is to do Maven filtering on a text file, and then put the git commit ID. That way you can say, oh, well, I did this commit, and then it was continuously delivered into production. The commit is this info endpoint. That's a very common strategy. A lot of people do that. You don't have to, whatever you want, right? But some way of understanding which version of the app is running, for example. Right? Is that okay so far? Okay. Another one is beans. So this shows you all of the objects Spring Boot has created for you, as well as the way that they are wired together. So here, for example, is my reservation UI, and it lives in this Java class here. And it has this dependency, reservation repository. I injected the reservation repository. So now I can see the dependencies in my beans. If you take this data and put it into a graph database like Neo4j, it's a really cool picture, right? You can do whatever you want, right? There's a lot of beans, right? Spring is helping you out a lot here. So what else do I have? Autoconfig shows you all of the conditions that have to be true for the current state of the system. We'll come back to this, but this is an endpoint that you might want to know about. Now, my favorite endpoint is health. So my favorite endpoint is health. Health is it's health. It shows you the health of the application. And it'll show you the disk space and the data source because we have disk space and a data source on the class path. But you can override it, you can change it, right? So it's going to show you up by default. And if you add other types of things to the class path, it'll do that. I want to configure or change this application a little bit, okay? So I want to say @bean health indicator. I want to add my own custom health indicator, right? So Alibaba health indicator, right? And I'll say return new health indicator. And you can see Spring has already got health indicators for a lot of things out of the box. Here's composite, which is going to show everything. It's going to merge them. Here's data source, disk space, JMS, Java Mail, MongoDB, RabbitMQ, Redis, Solr, and Elasticsearch. So these will automatically be configured by convention if you have these types. But I'm going to create my own. I'm going to say a new health indicator. Okay, and I'm going to say return health.status. There you go. Oh, nope. Fail. No. Okay, there we go. So that's my simple health indicator. And of course I could have said, oh, well, health.out of service. Or down with an exception. Or up, or whatever, right? But I'm just going to say this, right? And of course this is a perfect lambda. So I'll replace it with a lambda. The other thing I want to do is I want to control how the application is exposed. I don't want my metrics and my health endpoints in the same port and same context path as my production application. So we have a lot of other ways to tune the application. By convention, Spring Boot will look for properties in application.properties or application.yml, YAML. So I can say server port equals 8,000. Management port is 9,000. And if you're using IntelliJ, Eclipse, or even NetBeans, this metadata that I'm showing you, these auto completions, they work. Right? It's based on metadata that Spring Boot provides. So it's based on the types that are on the class path right now. So I can say management port is 9,000. I can say management.context path is /admin. Right? So now I can run the application again. Here we go. And I'll drink some more coffee. I need the coffee. Oh. So here we go. So here's the application again. This is going to fail. Of course it's going to fail, right? It's the wrong port. So I go to 8,000 reservations. That works, right? Or reservations.php or UI, right? All of that is there. But now if I want to see the health endpoint, this won't work, right? Remember what I said. I said admin. So I have to go to /admin to see this one, right? So now I've moved the application around. I've changed certain things. And I've just changed basics here. But again, I can do 9,000 admin. Oh, by the way, there's my custom health status. Right? So that got contributed as well. I can also change much more interesting things like server.ssl and set up the key store and the password and all that stuff. Right? And the reason we want you to be able to configure all these things in your application is because we believe, and we've seen very often, people deploy one application to one Tomcat. And sometimes they have concerns related to their application, and these concerns live in the configuration for the server. And they treat them as two things. Operations owns the server, your developers own the app. But that's not the case, is it? the SSL is something that is very specific to my application. So they should live together. I want to version them together. I want to iterate through continuous integration together. These are the same thing. They belong together. So now we expose them all together. These are application-specific concerns. I have seen teams that, because they want to keep these things together, they check in Tomcat into their Git repository. Seriously, it's the only way to guarantee that they don't fall out of sync, right? They have to version them. And that's very important, is to be able to say in one environment that the Tomcat being used is the one that we blessed. So this is all now part of the same suite. Now this is just, I've shown you the REST endpoints. The REST endpoints are one way to look at all this information. You can also do it from JMX. So I'm going to go here, say insecure connection, mbeans, and I'll go to org Spring Framework endpoints. And there's the, for example, the health endpoint as well, right? So again, all that information that I showed you from REST is now in JMX. I can also go to my favorite thing, which is the remote shell. The remote shell is here. If I use Spring Security can talk to SAML, it can talk to OpenID, it can talk to OAuth, it can talk to LDAP, it can talk to Active Directory, it can talk to Kerberos, it can talk to PAM, it can talk to whatever, SiteMinder, right? I mean, anything you can imagine wanting to talk to, Spring Security can talk to. But since I didn't configure this, or you can even just talk to a database, since I did not configure that, I get a default user and a default password. Okay? So now I can go to my shell and I say SSH -p 2000 user at 127.0.0.1, enter, paste. And now I've got good quality ASCII artwork. Again, when you're in a production crisis and you're trying to triage what is happening, this ASCII artwork can save your day. It's calming, it's soothing, it's relaxing. Now, you can ask for help. You can say, show me the help. Great, well, what do I want to do? I want to look at the metrics. Here's the metrics that I showed you earlier. And notice that it's live, it's moving by itself, right? I don't have to refresh or anything. So same as before. I want to do system prop ls. Right, great. I want to say endpoint list. Here's the endpoints. Endpoint invoke. Health endpoint. There's the health endpoint, right? I heart Alibaba, right? So there's all that as well, right? My favorite, of course, is, oh, actually there's some others, like Java type. You can do Java type.lang.string, and it gives you the reverse compiled assembly for that type, whatever, who cares. And then my favorite is dashboard. So this gives you, there you go, Java top, right? So the threads on the top are moving by themselves. This is all the threads in your current running application. And then on the bottom right, you have the heap, the non-heap, the code cache, and the metaspace. Metaspace, right here, this is the new permgen, right? So visibility into what your application is doing is what we care about. We care about these concerns, and you shouldn't have to work too hard to get them to work. Now, deployment is another very important concern, right? So I'm going to go back here to my build, and first of all, I should say that I have done a bad job here. I have done something very, very bad and I'm sorry about that. Real developers write their tests first. But I do demos, so I'm kind of lazy. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly write a unit test, okay? And then we're going to look at how to deploy and manage this application. So I'm going to say private web application context, right? And I'm using the Spring MVC test context framework, which makes it very easy to test REST APIs or HTTP APIs. I'm going to say private mock MVC, okay? And then I'm going to say at before, oops, okay? Public void before throws exception, and I'll say this dot mock MVC equals mock MVC builder dot web application context dot build, okay? Build. And then in my code, I'm going to just test my reservations endpoint. Get reservations. Okay? Throws exception. And I'm going to say this dot mock MVC dot perform. I'm going to say mock MVC request builders dot get reservations and expect mock MVC result matches content or status is okay, and expect mock MVC result matchers MVC result matchers dot content dot content type, and I can say application HAL plus JSON. Okay, so that's my basic unit test, testing my REST endpoint, for example. I could test other things, but whatever. So I should have done this first, and you know, obviously if we're trying to move fast, you need a good unit test harness. The mock MVC test framework will stand up your REST API and dispatch HTTP requests, but it does not stand up the web container. So it's much faster than just starting up a Tomcat. It goes all the way through Spring MVC. It does message conversion and all that. So anyway, now I want to look at this, from a deployment perspective, and I'm going to turn on one of my favorite features inside of Spring Boot 1.3, the new one. I'm going to go to the build plugin here. I'm going to say configuration executable true. Okay. So now CD desktop, CD reservation service, right? PWD. This is my demo. And I'm going to say Maven clean install, and that's going to run the unit test that I just ran, right? So good ASCII artwork again, very, very important. Good. So now if I go to the target directory, I have two things. I have the fat American jar. So here we are. 56 megs. Contains everything that I need to run this application. So I can just do java -jar reservation service. So this has Vaadin, all of Vaadin. This has an embedded web server. This has all of Hibernate. This has the Spring dependencies. This has an embedded Tomcat. So it has everything. I mean, like, just crazy. You can deploy this, again, by, Grandpa Ops. There's DevOps. I've got Grandpa Ops. I can send this to my grandpa and he can deploy it, right? So now it's up and running. I can change things in the application as well. I can override. I can say java -d server.port equals 8010 -jar reservation jar. So again, server.port is from here. Right? So I'm overriding the configuration there. So I'm going to say 8010 instead of 8000. Here we are. So it's going to start up. And by the way, notice that it's got color coding. So we even have default configuration for the logging to do color coding to make it look good, right? We care about these things out of the box. So now the application is running on port 8010, right? Even better, I can do, for more of a cloud environment, I can say export server port equals 8020, right? Java -jar reservation jar. So server.port becomes server_port as an environment variable. And then I run the application again, and it's up on 8020, right? So again, I'm able to exercise control. My favorite feature in Spring Boot 1.3 is something called an executable jar. So did you know how, I'm sure you who works on the JDK, I'm sure you know how jars are loaded, but the rest, you have to stay quiet. The rest of you, do you know how jars are read? How does the JVM load a jar? What?
As a zip file.
Yep. Did you know that it reads backwards? So it goes to the end of the file and then goes up. Whereas your operating system reads files from the top and goes down. So this gives you some interesting possibilities. So we have I've been using this java -jar, but actually that works. So it's an executable jar now, right? And the way that works is that when we run that plugin, if you see less reservation jar, so I just did, this is a shell script, first of all. Shell script, shell script, shell script, shell script, shell script, jar. Right? Shell script, jar. binary. It's like the MC Escher diagram, you know, the hand drawing itself. The shell script reads itself and then executes it. This script is also, look, It- what?
It's command. Stop. You can use the jar to stop.
Yeah, so you can use initd
Yeah.
and systemd already. So you just add it to the right directory and then it works.
So the script is for operating system.
It already knows how to do systemd and initd. And you can just execute it like I just did as well. But if you're trying to move quick and you want to do services, it doesn't get better. So you don't have to use it. I just think that's the coolest thing ever. So all of what I have shown you are, these are features designed to make the developer and the operations teams happy. And as we move further into this cloud native era, we talk about DevOps. So increasingly, the developers and the operations, they're the same. So it's important to make sure that both sides are happy. All of this is working thanks to something called auto configuration. So when you use a Spring Boot application, Spring Boot starts up and it looks in the meta-inf directory right here. It's meta-inf. It looks in the meta-inf directory of text of jars and it finds a text file called spring.factories. You can use this in your own code as well. You can do the same thing. And it says, oh, look, org spring framework, boot, auto configure, enable auto configuration equals, and then there's a long list of comma delimited class names. So it says RabbitMQ, properties, Spring Batch, Spring Cache, Spring Cloud, persistence, Elasticsearch, JPA, Mongo, REST, FreeMarker, Jackson, JDBC, JTA, JMS, JMX, Flyaway for database migrations, Liquibase for database migrations, JOOQ, right? This is a new in Spring Boot 1.3 for typed SQL, Java Mail, mobile, Mongo, Redis, reactive programming, Mustache, security, socials, Solar, velocity, timely, transactions, error codes, multi-part uploads, WebSockets, etc. So these are just Java configuration classes, and they all try and help you out. So I'm going to download the source for this. Okay. Download source. Am I off the internet? No. How do I get back to my, where do I go? Is that right? See, I'm not, what's the Wi-Fi? Somebody?
Maybe we can disconnect and reconnect.
Is it? What's a website that works in here? Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
Did you try turning it off and on again? Okay. Help. Yeah. Oh, while he's doing that, are there questions so far? This is all old. I understand that this is very boring, but just hold on. The good stuff is coming. What do you think so far, though? Yeah?
Good.
Good. Okay. Good. Okay. Yay. Wow. Thank you. So, cool. So now if I go to here, hit download sources. I don't know what to do. Okay. So, delete the existing project and re-import. Oh. So spring.factories here, rabbit autoconfig.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You see, there are a lot of Spring factory configuration files.
Yes.
And each of them are in different jars. So how does Spring integrate, get all these factory files
It just looks in the meta inf directory.
using a service locator?
In the beginning it scans.
Okay.
So, but we don't scan every class, just the jars for that one little text file. So it's like 40 files. If you have 40 jars, you have 40 files. It's not a lot. So, okay, I wanted to show you this, and I can't download sources, but whatever. This is a Java configuration class, and it defines configuration for RabbitMQ. I wonder if I can just do this. Oops. JK. I just want to show you the source code. Sorry. How do you? Ooh. Mwah. There. So this is the Java configuration class for RabbitMQ. And the way it works is it's just a Java configuration class, but it defines certain conditions because I don't have RabbitMQ on the class path right now. So I don't want to try and load types and beans for RabbitMQ if they're not there. So this class is annotated with conditions. This is a feature inside of Spring Framework 4. I'm saying, okay, Spring Boot, load this Java configuration, but only if the Rabbit template from Spring RabbitMQ is on the class path, and only if the channel type from the AMQP client library is on the class path. So we're just doing a conditional. It's saying only if this type is present should you evaluate this Java configuration. We're also saying, okay, here's some beans. Here's a bean for the AMQP admin, right? And the AMQP admin gets defined, but only if the user, it gets defined only if the user hasn't defined this bean of the same type, okay? So this gives you the ability to define very dynamic things. Are you with me on this? I just want to make sure you catch that this is very tricky, so I want to make sure we're all on the same page on this part. This Java configuration class defines beans, but it only does so if this type is present, right? And then it defines the beans and says, okay, if this class is on the class path, then load these definitions. And here's a bean. And it says, oh, I'm going to define AMQP admin, but only if the user hasn't created that bean as well. So if I define my own bean with return value AMQP admin in XML or Java, then that will be used instead. But if it's not created, then this will be used. So it's dynamic. I can contribute things and override the defaults. I can also say, oh, if this property is present, then don't, if the property is spring.rabbitmq.dynamic equals false, then this will not get created, right? And so in this way, I'm able to define objects that exist only if there are beans and classes on the class path, or that do certain things. This is how, as I have been showing you these demos, I added Spring Boot, start a web, and then voila, magic, I have a web server. I added the actuator type in the remote shell. Magic, I had actuator endpoints in my service, no configuration. If you're building, as I know you are, a SOA framework, a large system framework, and you have different things you need to configure for every project, you put them in a Java config class, make them dynamic, make them conditional, and then put that jar on the class path of your Spring Boot-based apps, and they automatically get standardized. So if you have certain kinds of configuration changes for metrics and for the health endpoints or whatever, define them once, put them in spring.factories in your own Alibaba or Alipay or Taobao jar, put them in the class path, and they automatically work. So now as you create services, it's easy to distribute consistent patterns And I know a lot of teams, they have standardized on Spring, but they have like a 20-page document saying, okay, if you're going to create a new service for our company, use this archetype, configure this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Now it's much simpler. Your configuration can provide everything, and then the user can override. Right? This is how you ensure consistency across your services. So this is not just for us. This is what you can use as well to provide consistent services. That's how I was able to do all this magic. Okay, so any questions on all this? This is just Spring Boot. We still have, this is boring, I understand. But I need to explain this to be able to understand Spring Cloud. So any questions on this part so far? I want to mention also that the metrics and all that stuff, we support like a crazy amount of ways to report. So you can do OpenTSDB, StatsD, JMX, Redis, Graphite, Ganglia, Jolokia, right? These are all technologies to report and visualize information about the application. I only showed you REST, JMX, and the remote shell, right? But we can write all of this data to other systems already, right, for you. So, what do you think so far?
Actually, I don't have much more experience on Spring Boot, but for something you have shown us, I'm very interested in something you show us. You can collect some performance data for application, for example, by JMX, show some heap usage, CPU usage, something like. So I want to know, you just collect this data by JMX management show?
Right.
Okay. So my question is, do you measure some performance impact or overhead for GMX?
So the way the system works is we have metrics writers and metrics readers.
Okay.
These are interfaces, and you can inject a metrics writer anywhere in your code.
Okay.
So every time there's a transaction on the shopping cart, you can say metrics increment. I can add more to the value. You understand? So I can write updated metrics. We provide default metrics for request count and memory and all that, but you can provide your own metrics. What that metrics writer talks to is configurable.
Okay.
So if you're using JMX, you can make it asynchronous if you want, right? We have one for Redis, we have one for StatsD. But again, if you want to write that code, again, you just test that one thing. So I don't know what the actual numbers of calling JMX are.
Okay.
But I assure you, we're trying to do it as efficiently as possible. And if JMX doesn't work, then maybe something else. And you can also make them asynchronous. It is also just an interface. So if ours sucks, and you hate ours, it's easy to define a bean that does it better, to override all of the pieces.
Okay. So you mean the developer can provide their own metrics by overriding writers and readers, right?
And their metrics repository.
Oh, okay.
I can also store it differently. Maybe I want to write it to Kafka or something.
So they also can customize some protocol, communication.
Of course, everything is pluggable. It's just interfaces.
Okay.
We provide default implementations, but just like you saw earlier with the health indicator, when I contribute my health indicator, it gets considered instead of just the regular one.
Okay.
So you can change everything. And it's just regular dependency injection. Define the bean of the right type and it gets used.
Okay. So do you have any recommendation for communication protocol? For example, which protocol is more efficient or fast in production?
No, I don't, because it's the communication protocol itself isn't so much the problem, right?
Yeah.
OpenTSDB, StatsD, I think is just regular HTTP, but it's done in an asynchronous thread and it's super fast and it's a very small payload,
Okay.
right? So it's your code has to move so fast, and then you can write the messages to the reporter. However, and you can also do sampling. You can say every other fifth, maybe every 5 requests or whatever, something like that. So I don't have any recommendations. But
So it should be developer perspective responsibility to manage the performance in that. If for example, I just select some protocol to
yeah,
get some data.
sure, but that's always true, right? I mean, we're just trying to make it easy so that you can do this. You're going to do this anyway, right?
Yeah, you
Big
just provide some framework
Right.
for developer to
Exactly.
collect. Yeah, okay.
I was talking to C-Trip, and they have something called CAT,
Okay.
Central Application
What's the full name?
I don't know. Yeah.
What's the full name for cat?
Central Application something.
Okay.
I forget. It's open source, so you can C-Trip, CAT. I don't know where it is, but
You mean they need a C-Trip that's using cat to collect data?
no, they have a system that they created called CAT,
Okay.
and it collects metrics.
Okay.
So you could write a metrics writer that talks to their system, for example, instead
So
of
open source?
Yeah.
Okay.
right. So and you probably have your own as well because you're a big website, right? You probably have 5. Who knows?
You have Tracer.
You have what?
Tracer?
Okay.
Tracer, yeah.
Can you tell me what that? So can I take notes? I want to take notes as
I
well.
think that you know that we have Tracer to collect some data.
What is the Alibaba? What is it called?
We just have some system called Alipay Tracer.
Alipay
Alipay Tracer.
How do you,
Twitter.
It's a login system.
Twitter?
Tracer.
Tracer.
TR
TRACER.
Tracer. Ah, I'm so sorry. Like that.
Yes.
Okay. Is that open source?
No.
Oh. Okay. So okay, you could configure this to talk to that instead, right?
Maybe we can think about it.
No, that's what I'm saying. I want to talk to you about this, and so if we can make this system work for you,
Okay.
right? I believe that we have. I want to make sure that this works for giants, right? And that's why everything is pluggable. So we provide OpenTSDB with OpenTSDB was started by Twitter.
Okay.
It does billions and billions of page views every hour or impressions every hour.
Okay.
It's meant to do super high scale.
Okay.
You know, it uses is it Kafka, something like that. It's using crazy high scale metrics. Graphite is not super high scale. Graphite uses Python, and it's like a syslog-D event. It's a process you send a binary protocol to, but then it'll display it. But if you get more than a few million impressions per hour, it'll fall down. You know.
Okay.
So again, use the one that's right for you and that your tool chain already knows about. It's not hard to write the integration so that this all just works for you. Okay. Okay. Other questions before we move on to the more interesting stuff?
The Spring Boot support OSGI?
No, not that I know of. But I'm not a really big believer in OSGI. So let's talk about Spring Cloud, which is about microservices, right? Spring Cloud is a system for building. Spring Cloud is a framework for building distributed systems. And one of the nice things about moving to this architecture is that you don't really need, if you're trying to do independent deployability, then OSGI is not that helpful, right? Because I can now deploy many processes. It doesn't matter. And it's easy for me to say, oh, let's make everything distributed. I know it sounds stupid for me to just say that. But because I know that there is complexity, there's pain involved in moving to a distributed system. However, as you know, because you work at one of the biggest companies in the world, biggest websites in the world, there are patterns out there to simplify this, to make the pain not so bad. And the benefits usually are more than the pain. Remember, microservices aren't about, for companies like Netflix, which also uses Spring Boot and Spring Cloud, for companies like Netflix, microservices are not about technical speed or technical features. Of course, it's more pain to use microservices than to not use them. Of course. But they do it anyway because what it gives them is independent deployability. It gives them agility organizationally. Microservices when we talk about microservices, and again, I use microservices, but again, conceptually, there's a lot in common with SOA. You know, it's sort of SOA done right, you know. Conceptually, there's a lot in common. What we want is organizational agility. Do you want some water, my friend? No, I'm sorry. Just, poor guy. So, have you heard of Conway's Law? Conway's Law says that software will model or it will reflect the organization that it serves. So if I have a compiler, if I'm building a compiler, and there are 4 different teams that work on the compiler, my compiler will probably have 4 passes. It'll be a 4-pass compiler. If I'm building a system with one team in Shanghai and another in San Francisco, it will probably be that the team in San Francisco and the one in Shanghai don't work on the same service. They'll probably create 2 different services because it's easier for these services to be developed independently, right? Because otherwise they have to synchronize the development teams. If I am a business like Alibaba, I don't want to deploy, you know, there's no Alibaba.war. There's not even just Alipay.war or Taobao.war. There's tens and dozens or hundreds or thousands maybe of services, right? And each service is probably developed by a small team. And that service serves its own business purpose. Management goes to the technology people and say, we need to move fast on this particular business domain. Faster than these other teams, because right now the market says so. The market says that we have an opportunity to win if we go faster. So maybe this team needs to deploy every day to be able to realize value, whereas this other team is working in a business vertical that is already stable and it doesn't need to be so aggressive. Okay? So Conway's Law says that your software will look like your organization. If you have 5 different teams, you'll probably have 5 different services. They've even done studies to prove this. And they found that if you took open source software, like OpenOffice, which is an open source version of a proprietary piece of software like Microsoft Office, right? OpenOffice, they found, tends to be more modular because it's developed by different teams all around the world. So the boundaries between the components has to be clear. When Microsoft Office was developed, it was developed by one team sitting in the same room. So the boundaries between components are less clear, right? The component, your boundaries of the components are a reflection of your organization. They look very similar usually. And there's a corollary, right? Corollary, which means that if Conway's Law is true, it means that you can improve your software by improving your organization. You can refactor your organization. And by extension, win in software, right? So this is the real value of SOA or microservices. It's not technology. I mean, I love technology. I'm here to talk to you about technology. But the reason we embrace this is to move faster, period. Everything else is just teasing, you know? So Spring Cloud is a set of tools to support moving faster in a distributed system, in a microservice-centric system. Now I'm going to go ahead and quickly refactor my application. Remember this application? I wanted to go back and change it to be a little bit simpler. So I'm going to move back to 1.2.5. Dot release, whatever. Here, let me just do this. Reservation service, and I'll say I want the config client, and that's it. And I'll say H2 and JPA. I'm going to hit generate. And this will be a second one. I'm just going to open this and use it to move my build back to the old system. So I have Spring Boot 1.25. And that way I can remove some of the features in my example to keep it simpler, because I'm not going to worry about my VOD and UI. I don't care about that right now. I just want to show you a bigger picture. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to copy these dependencies. Okay, goodbye to this. Goodbye to that. Goodbye to this and this. And we don't need this either. And everything else is the same, I guess. Yep, okay. And now my code will break because my unit test is different. So I'll go back here. I'm going to bring back my regular REST controller to keep it simpler. Okay, Alt-Enter. And I'm going to delete my MVC one because I don't care about that. I don't need my Vaadin user interface, so goodbye to that. I'll keep my demo. Okay, that seems simple enough. Good, so there's my much simpler reservation service. I've just removed a lot of the code that was there before, and I don't need this anymore. I don't need that either. Okay, so I'm just getting rid of stuff I don't need. It's just a REST API now. So if I run this code, first I need to make sure my REST API works. So I'll say application JSON. If that's going to work, this has to be very explicit. So I say produces media type application JSON value. Okay. So now I go back to here. I run my unit test. We should have now a working REST API. Very simple. Good, that worked. And if I go back to my REST API and just rerun it, I'm going to get rid of this one here. Okay, so now I go here, localhost 8000 reservations. So that's my much simpler REST API. We're back to where we started like half an hour ago, just to keep it simple. Now, I've got a simple REST API. This is my service. In a microservice system, of course, you're going to have more than one service, but for our purposes, we will talk about one service and one client and the things that are required to support that service in a distributed system. The first thing that becomes very important when you move to a distributed system, to a system with lots of configuration and a lot of services, is centralized configuration management. So, of course, thus far, up until now, I have used -d and environment variables and application.properties. I could even use, I didn't even show you, I can also use application.yaml. So if I do maven clean install, come on, cd target, there's my jar again, except it's no longer executable. That doesn't work anymore because I went back to 1.2.5. But I can say echo application, echo server, new line, space, port 8050, application.yaml, cat application.yaml, right? And then I do java -jar, and now it'll honor the application YAML or application properties file that's outside of the jar, right? So that's also nice. Oops, pkill java. Okay, so now it's running on 8020, right, just like we expect. So that's one way to do configuration. But again, all of these approaches, all of them, require you to restart the process, right? First, and they're also not centrally managed. I want to be able to change configuration in one place. If Josh drinks too much Tsingtao and logs into the computer and makes changes and things break, I want to see where, it was Josh. He did it at 10 o'clock last night or 11 o'clock. All sauced up, So having that central configuration is very important. Also, I want to be able to support things like encryption. You work on a large website with a lot of money. You know that you cannot store passwords in plain text. You cannot store them in a file system in plain text. You have to do at-rest encryption, right? So centrally managed. I also want to be able to change things on the fly. Right? I don't want to have to restart the process just to see new configuration. So to support these use cases, Spring Cloud provides the config server. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to say config service, and I'm going to go down to the Spring Cloud column here, and I'm going to say config server. Then I'm going to hit generate. and I'm going to wait. Here we go. There we go. So here's the config server. Command C, Command Shift V, open. I'm going to open this dependency up. Now I have to write some code and not, I freaking hate writing code. So this is my sort of normal thing here. I'm going to say @enable config server. And there we go. So I'm done with my code. Now I have to tell it what to manage. I want to manage a repository of configuration information. I also want to have the ability to go back and forth and see who made changes and roll back. I want to have different configuration for different environments. And it turns out that Git is really, really good for that. Right? So we're going to use Git. So I'll go to my application.properties. I'll say Spring Cloud config server git URI. Okay? The config server is a proxy for information stored in a configuration file system or HTTP-based Git endpoint. So I can say, okay, let's go to the config server, config information, living on my desktop. I could use a URL. I could say, HTTP GitHub or lab.com, blah, blah, blah. I could, using an environment variable, I could say git server, and then I can even do something like, if there's an environment variable, use that. Otherwise, use HTTP localhost, whatever, right? I can do whatever I want, right? But to keep it simple, I'm going to say use the configuration directory on my local desktop in my home directory. And I'll tell it to be running on port 8888. Okay, good luck. So now I'm going to go to my desktop, cd desktop, and I'm going to say copy r desktop old beautiful microservices config repo desktop config repo. And the config repo has several files in there. Each microservice gets one file. All microservices get application.properties. So this is for everybody, but only Eureka service gets this configuration. This has to be Git. So I'm going to say git init, git add, and git commit, adding config. Okay? Now, I can go back to my code, go back here, oops, run that. If I go here, localhost 88888 reservation service master. I've got a REST API, right? And this REST API is telling me that if a microservice connects and the microservice is called reservation service, by default it'll get the configuration from application properties and then the specific configuration from reservation service properties. But notice I have two properties that conflict. Server.port 0 means run on any random port. It means connect to any port. Server port 8000 is specific. This is the one that's only on that service. So this will become the winner. This is more important than this one because it's specific. So I have hierarchical configuration as well. Now I need to make my reservation service talk to the config server. So I go to my build and I guess I just do it the hard way. Spring Cloud Starter config, actually Eureka, and I can do config. Excuse me. Okay, so that'll bring that in. And then of course I need to tell it where the config server lives. So again, I don't need any of this anymore. This lives in the config server. So instead I'm going to change it. I'm going to say Spring application name is reservation service. So that's how I'm going to know what my ID is, what my service ID is. And then I'm going to say Spring Cloud config URI HTTP localhost 888. But of course I could use an environment variable. I could say config server conf server whatever and then do that. So if the variable is there, it'll use that. Otherwise it'll default to this. Okay? I mean basics. So whatever. Is it easier if I just leave it like that, or do you care? Doesn't matter. I don't know, I'll just leave it like that. Okay? So there's the reservation service. So I'm going to say bootstrap.properties. Now the reason I have to rename this file is because, yeah, bootstrapped up properties by convention gets loaded before all of the other configuration. Because of course I'm telling Spring to go to the config server first. All of the configuration gets loaded into the environment, the Spring environment abstraction. So this is the same, all the same mechanisms that you are used to using will work. But in order to support that, I have to load these properties before everything else. So that's why there's this special file called bootstrap. All of my microservices will just have bootstrap.properties. Okay? And there we go. So now if I run this, you know, I have no application configuration here. It should all run on port 8000 still, right? Because it's going to get its configuration from there. If that works, then we'll come back. So the other thing I want to do is I want to inject, see this message here? I want to inject the message into my application. So did it work? It did work, right? So it's on port 8000. So all the configuration from the config server is working. Let's inject that configuration, the message. I'll say message REST controller. And I'll say at value. Oops. Okay, private string. I'll say at request mapping. Message. Good. So I'm just going to return the message. And I want to be able to change that message later on. Okay, so I'll use at refresh scope. And this tells Spring that this bean is supposed to be a proxy, a container. And then if I want to, I can throw away the bean without restarting the process. Okay, this is great for data sources and for feature flags, for canary builds, you know, all these kinds of things. So now I'm going to restart it. I'll drink some more coffee because I love coffee. Okay. So now if we go to localhost 8000, there's my reservations data. But if I go to message, there, I've got that old message from Kansas City in the United States, right? I want to change the configuration here. I want to say Joe, reservation service.properties. Okay, get commit. Okay, so now if I go to the config server, it's immediately visible. The config server uses JGet, so it doesn't poll, it doesn't do anything like that. It gets an event when there's a commit on the repository. But it keeps everything in memory. So if you make a request here, it's not going to read from the file system each time. It only invalidates its cache when there's an event. And then all the other microservices will connect to this config service to get the configuration. Now what I want to do is I want to make my message endpoint see that there is new configuration. Again, I don't want it to constantly poll every time there's configuration, right? So I have to tell it to refresh itself. There are several ways to do this. One is to use another actuator endpoint. Remember we saw the beans and the metrics and the health? Those are called actuator, right? This is the framework inside of Spring Boot that provides all that. Another endpoint is curl -d, curly bracket, 8080 for 8000, refresh. Curly bracket -d just means empty post, okay? So it's a post to the refresh endpoint, and it says, oh look, the message changed, right? So now if I refresh that, there's that. It gets the new environment configuration. It's here. So it's throwing away the internal configuration for that one thing and reloading it. Everything else is still the same though, right? It hasn't restarted the app or anything. Here's the original app. There's the original printout. So it doesn't restart the process. It just throws away that one bean, right? And it does that by using a nested application context. So that's why you see output about an application context. It creates an application context for one bean and then throws away the context, which is great. So you get isolation and all that. Now, this is a simple example. This is a silly example, I think. You know, you're not going to do, I don't know if you care about your messages, but maybe you have something more more mission critical, like a data source. You say data source, Oracle, and you say at value, URL, string, return null, whatever. You say at refresh scope. So now you can see, oh, well, if I did refresh, then this would also be reconfigured. And people would not get a null pointer that have a valid pointer to the data source, but now it would point to something different. This is a very simple example, obviously, very silly. The way I just showed you uses the actuator endpoint, but you can also use JMX. You can go to the node and go to JMX and say refresh. You can also use the Spring Cloud event bus. So what this does is it connects all. No, come on, guys. I need somebody to help me. I can't. This demo needs Wi-Fi. Oh. I can use the Spring Cloud event bus, and the event bus uses RabbitMQ, and it's one class. You can use whatever you want, but by default we have one that uses RabbitMQ, and what it does is it says, okay, for every microservice I will connect to this RabbitMQ, and I'll listen for a message on the event bus, and I can send one message to one node, and it'll trigger a message to all these microservices, and they can all refresh themselves. So you send one message, and every microservice gets new configuration on the fly, right? You can also use Kafka. You can also write integration with sockets and whatever you want, right? But the point is, it's one class. We only support AMQP out of the box, but you could replace that class very easily if you don't want to use RabbitMQ. That's my point. Is it working?
It's okay.
Yay! Thank you. So this is the event bus right here, right? So you just add that to the class path, and then you tell it, oh, here's the RabbitMQ instance I want to talk to. And you know what a great place to put the RabbitMQ instance information is? In application.properties in the config server. So whatever. Or put it in an environment variable and just look it up that way. But either way, the point is you only configure that once. You add this to the class path and you're done. You write no code. Then the microservice automatically connects, it'll receive messages, and it'll update itself. So there's two parts. There's the thing that says, Spring, refresh all the beans that have the refresh context. And then there's also the part that that's a trigger. You pull the button and it refreshes. Whether you use the actuator or JMX or AMQP or whatever, it's up to you. We have 3 good options out of the box, but you can also add your own. Okay. So that's the config service. I didn't show you all the features, of course. You can secure everything. Everything can be secure. You can use usernames and passwords on the Git repository, on the config server. The passwords, I mentioned earlier encryption. So I can say Adam. I can do something like this. I can say reservation service. Don't need that. Dot properties. There's this. I could have said password equals, cipher, blah blah blah. Whatever the encrypted version of the string is, and then you tell the config server to use a provided key to decrypt that password. So you store it in plain text encrypted, but when you inject it into your Spring app, it becomes decrypted in flight. Okay, so this is another example. I'll leave you to explore it. There's a whole lot more there, but we have to move on since we have so much more to talk about. Now, another thing that is very important when you move to a microservice-based system is service registration and discovery. Right? There are a lot of different options out there. Like we're going to look at something called Eureka from Netflix, but I'm sure you probably have your own or something. Baidu has BNS, the Baidu Name Service. Obviously, there's Consul, Consul. There's Zookeeper. There's etcd, right? Spring Cloud for GA, for 1.0 release general availability software right now, only supports Eureka. But GitHub.com, Spring Cloud Consul is a release preview, right? Okay. Zookeeper is also a release preview. And in the incubator, which is not release preview, but it's very early, we have Spring Cloud D as well. Okay? So we are working to support more, and if you have some custom one that you want to support, I can help you support it. So there's two jobs when you work with service registration. You have registration, you have to say, I'm here, I'm a service, I'm available, if anybody needs me, find me right here. That's service registration. And then the part two is service discovery. I need to be able to ask questions about my system. Where does this service live? Is it available? Is it up? What is its metadata? So in these examples, in these registries, they're all read and write. They say I'm here, and they can also answer questions. They can ask questions, right? Some environments, like a platform as a service, like Cloud Foundry, there's no need to do read and write. It's just read. I need to ask Cloud Foundry where my services are. Why would I don't have to tell it though, of course, because my cloud, it started the services up for me. It already knows where those services are. I don't need to tell it I'm here. It knows. So we have integration for Spring. We have a similar abstraction implementation for Cloud Foundry and for Lattice, but those are only read-only, right? These other four are read and write. Zookeeper, Console, etcd, and Eureka. Is that right? Yeah, 4. Okay. So there's 6 total implementations that I know of, and there's no reason we couldn't write more. I would like to write one for Baidu name service, actually, for example. So let's use that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install Eureka, right? You can use whatever you want, but Eureka is really nice because it's super small. And it's just a little web app, basically. It's a REST API. So I can go here and I can say Eureka service. Great. And then I go back to my config thing. I'm going to say I'm going to be a config client, just like my reservation service. I want to talk to the config server. And then I want to be a Eureka server. I don't need that. And I'm going to hit generate. And so what I'm doing is I'm installing my registry. I'm not using it yet. I'm installing it. And again, you're not going to use this for console. You're not going to go to the start.spring.io and create a console server. Console is written in the Go language. So there's no way to do that, right? I'm installing it here. So here we go. Okay, same as before. Spring, right? Bootstrap.properties. Bootstrap.properties, Command A, Command V. I'm going to say Eureka service, and then I'll go back to my code, and I've got to write a lot of code here at enable Eureka server. Okay, now I'm done. So when I run this, it's going to connect to the config service, and it's going to get its configuration. And it'll stand up, and it should be, if we look at the config, cat Eureka service, on port 8761. So, localhost 8761. There it is. There's my config server. This is my registry, my service registry, Eureka. Right, and this is a human API, of course, for wetware, but for software there's a REST API, right? So this is where I'm looking for applications here. Now let's go teach our reservation service how to talk to this. Okay, so we go back to the reservation service. Oh, Eureka is really upset with me. It's angry. And the reason it's angry is because I did something really stupid. I created one instance of Eureka, which is like, never do that, right? Why would you do that? This is the heart of your system. Everything will connect to the registry. So it has to be highly available. Should never, ever stand up one instance. So it is asking me, where's my replica? No replica, no replication. Why? And it's upset. So there's the null. Big fat, don't do that. It's fine for now. I don't care. It's just a demo. But it's very easy to set it up in a highly available mode. In this case, it's upset. And it will actually show you red letters, big red bloody errors here, saying you screwed up. Fix this. This is bad. Don't do this. Danger, danger. So now, let's go back to the config, to the reservation service. I'm sorry, and let's add Eureka support so we can talk to Eureka and register ourselves. So here is palm.xml, and I'm going to add Spring Cloud Starter Eureka. Okay, and then I go back to my demo application, and I say @enable discovery client, and the discovery client, I could use @enable Eureka client, but this is just an alias. All this does is it brings in discovery client. So what we have is an abstraction called the discovery client, and that if you implement that implementation like we have with etcd and Zookeeper and Console and Cloud Foundry and Lattice and Eureka, then the rest of the framework plugs in. You can do client-side load balancing, you can do security, you can do micro proxy routing. All of that is based on doing this one implementation. So I'm going to use @enable Eureka client, but I'm going to just bring in discovery client. As long as there's one implementation on the class path, it'll use that, and everything else will just snap together. No problem. So now I'm going to hit restart, and then that's how long has that been there? I'm sorry. Now it's going to eventually register itself with the registry, and I want to build my first client now. So we're going to give this a few seconds, and while that's happening, I'm going to go here and I'm going to build a client to my REST API. So what I want to do is I want to say, okay, reservation client, like so, and I want to use the config client. I want to use the Eureka support. I want to use Feign and Hystrix and Ribbon and Zool, okay, and then I'm going to hit generate. And these are a lot of great pieces from around the ecosystem, around the community. Command-Shift-V, open. Do I have enough? Okay. In the meantime, if I go here, there's my service. Right? Reservation service is registered here. Can you all see that? I'm sorry, it's so small. So there it is. It's registered in the API. So now anybody else can find it. And I can say, oh, look, there's only one instance right now, but there could be 10. And it's on this host and this port. And the reason we want a service registry, because remember, I could just do DNS, right? DNS will give me, I can say, oh, here's 10 instances, use DNS and then load balance. But Netflix, who created Eureka, they still use Eureka. And the reason they do that is because they want client-side load balancing. They want the ability to make decisions about how to do load balancing on the client of the code, not the service. That way, again, for a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones is that it's versioned with the application. So we're going to go ahead and build a client now, and we're going to look at ways to do client-side load balancing with Ribbon and so on. So now, if I go back to my code here, am I already running IntelliJ for that? Reservation service, Eureka, config, nope. So go back here, reservation client, open this. Okay, that was fast. I zoned out for a second thinking it would take forever. So here we go, demo application. First thing is, of course, I want to be a discovery client. I want to participate in that registration. Just like all the other ones, I'm going to do bootstrap.properties, Command-C. Go back here, Command-V, and I'll say reservation client. I'm going to open up this file. Bootstrap.properties. Great. Okay. So there we go. That's going to run. And now I'm going to build a few different things. Again, I'm going to do the same thing 3 different ways to kind of show you your choices, first of all. So the first thing is we're going to act as a pure client service, right? This is actually going to be what we call an edge service, as opposed to a mid-tier service. So mid-tier or backing service, or back-end service. So my mid-tier service is the reservation service. My reservation client is my edge service, right? Edge service. And the edge service is going to sit on the edge of my data center, receiving requests from outside of the data center, from outside the firewall. My mid-tier services are all inside the firewall. They don't talk to the outside. And I want this reservation client to be available and receiving traffic. And I want it, in fact, to be specific to actual types of clients. Maybe it's Android or iOS or PlayStation or Xbox or HTML5 or whatever. Okay. So first, let's demonstrate what it is to act as a service that calls another service. So I'm going to build some command line runners here. Now, if I look at my build, Remember, I've got Spring Cloud Starter Config, Spring Cloud Starter Eureka, Feign, Hystrix, Ribbon, and Zool. So just like we saw before. I'm going to build a command line runner, and I'm going to say DC. I'm going to inject a low-level discovery client object. And the discovery client is, like I said, it's an abstraction. By default, we have one implementation that is going to be used is the Eureka discovery client. If there is no implementation, I'll get the no-op one, and it's very confusing. And anyway, sorry about that. But we're going to use the discovery client for Eureka. So I'm going to say return args dc.get instances, and that's going to return a list of service instance objects. Okay, so I'm going to say reservation hyphen service, and I'm going to say for each service instance, do the following: system.out.println string.format service ID, host, and port. Good. So it's just printing out the information from the registry. Okay. Very, very simple. Here we go. Let's run that and see if that works. I should get one entry, right? That's what we know should work. Yay. Good. So that worked. So now reservation service came up, and it's got my host and port and so on. That's a little low level. Again, all I'm doing is I'm getting the service instances back, and I could take the host and port and then pass it to my REST client or my whatever client, right? But since I'm going to do REST in this case anyway, I'm going to use the REST template. And the REST template is, how many of you, have you ever used the REST template? REST template. It makes it very easy to do REST calls from the client. It's been around for 6 years. It's a nice HTTP client. It makes it one-liner for common operations. And you can add interceptors. You can say pre-process and post-process the request. Do gzip compression. Do OAuth. Do content negotiation. Do whatever, right? And it uses the same message converter strategies as the server side for Spring. So I can do Google protocol buffers. I can use JSON or XML or whatever. Hi, come on in. So I'm going to use the REST template. I'm going to say bean command line runner RT. I'm going to inject the pre-configured REST template that Spring provides, RT. And here I'm going to do a multi-line command line runner. And what I want to do is I want to call the REST. I want to say rt.exchange HTTP reservation hyphen service. Not that this is not DNS. This is the service ID from the registry. /reservations. HTTP method get. I'm not going to pass a body because it's an empty. It's not a post or a put or something like that. It's a get. So there's no body. And then I'm going to say that I want a response type that I can use. So remember what's going to happen. I'm going to make a REST call to my reservation service /reservations. It's going to give me JSON. And I need to take the JSON and turn it into an object I can work with on the client. If I wanted to, I could get a JSON DOM structure back, a JSON node object. But I want to bind my JSON to objects. So I'm going to create a client-side type. And the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want to share the type that's on the server with my client. Again, if you're using Google protocol buffers, you do that here instead. So this type is, if I change my service, I don't want my client to break. So I want to keep my type separate, so I'm going to copy the definition and duplicate it here, So I'll say private, long, ID, private, string, reservation name. Okay. Getter. I'm going to create a toString because I can. So that's just my little Pojo on the client, okay? Now, I'm going to say to Java, I know you, again, will probably know this, but the rest of you. What do I do in this case if I want to find out? What happens if I ask using reflection? How do I ask X what its generic argument is? This generic argument, string, What happens if I want to find out what that is using reflection? How do I do that?
I think it's a feature in Java 8.
I wish. I wish. That'd be so cool. Oh, man. So, unfortunately, you can't. What? Yeah?
In runtime, for Java generic in runtime, the type has been erased.
Right. Which sucks.
It's
So-
different from C++.
And C Sharp and every other language, yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is sad because I want that information. However, if I do this, I can say class X extends array list of string, and then I can say list of string X equals new X. And then at runtime, I can ask what your generic argument is, and that will be there. It'll be a list of string because it's baked into the class hierarchy. It's cooked into the parent-child lineage. That's the only way to keep that generic information, okay? And so this is a pattern that we discovered, Josh Brock and Bob Lee and who's the guy that created TestNG? Cedric Boyce. Cedric something like that. Cedric whatever. They discovered something called the type token pattern. And the type token pattern is a way of capturing generic arguments by creating an anonymous subclass. So I'm going to use that pattern here in Spring. I'm going to say parameterized type reference of list of reservation, PTR, equals new parameterized type reference. Right? See what I'm doing? I'm creating an anonymous subclass. If I don't have that, it fails. This is abstract. I have to subclass it. But there's no method to implement. I just have to subclass it. Now, at runtime, I can go in reflection. I can say, oh, PTR, what is your generic argument? And because I'm technically creating a subclass right here, I can find out that it's a list of reservations. So I can put that in here. I can say PTR. And then I can assign this to a variable. Okay. Result. Good. So there's now my data. It's got a response entity of list of reservation. And I can now use the response entity. I can say response entity dot get body list of reservation dot for each system out print line. Okay. So now if I run this, I should see all the information from the service. I'm telling Spring to convert it into a collection of list of reservation using generics. And then it'll take that JSON and map it to that object type for me. And it worked, right? So here's my client side with the data being sent back on the client. So that's not bad. And this is going to do client-side load balancing, right? So when I call this service, it's going to actually find, it's going to go to Eureka or Consul or Zookeeper or whatever, and it's going to say, okay, I found 10 instances. Which one do I use? It'll ask a component called Ribbon. Ribbon is a Netflix library for doing software-defined load balancing. By default, it'll use round robin. So I didn't have to specify anything. It'll just use that automatically. But if I want to do, for example, multi-tenancy, maybe I want to say only these nodes handle these customers and these nodes for these customers, I can write a custom strategy. I can write a custom load balancer. Maybe I have availability zone awareness. I say, oh, for services running in the eastern part of the country, use only these services here. But if you're on the west, then use these ones because it's faster, right? So I do load balancing based on proximity. Or maybe I have state. Maybe my client needs to stick to a certain set of nodes because that node is streaming video or something and you need to be stateful, sticky. You have a session, sort of. So again, that ability to make those decisions and keep them in the client logic means that you can build a service and then deploy it, but you don't make assumptions about how the client will use that service. For one service, it might be fine to do round robin. For another, it might be more important to do it like this. That's a client-side decision. And now that it's part of your code, you can change that. You can also now do interesting things. You can say, okay, well, instead of me calling DNS and having no idea what's going to happen, maybe it'll hang, maybe there's no service. Instead of me calling a DNS entry and then blocking for an hour because there's nobody responding, I can now say, oh, there's 0 instances, I'm not even going to bother. There's nothing in the registry, I won't even try, right? So instead of saying just go that way and blocking on a socket, I can make the dynamic decisions by asking the registry, is there anything available? So this is client-side load balancing, and again, it's a big feature. Remember, Amazon has DNS. It has the ability to do DNS, but Netflix still uses Eureka because of this flexibility. It's faster and it's safer. Now, this is nice. I like this approach because, I'm using REST. I'm still dealing with HTTP. I can get the, I can say response entity dot get status code, get headers, blah blah blah. All that is there, but I also get nice type safe objects if I want, and I can use Google protocol buffers instead or whatever. So that's a nice. I think that's a nice middle ground. It's not too abstract but not too low level like the discovery client. A little bit more abstract might be to use something like feign. Now feign in English, feign means to pretend, to act as. So maybe your friend has a birthday today, and you're going to throw a party to celebrate, right? And your friend comes to you and says, you're not planning a party for me today, are you? And you say, oh no, of course not. We forgot, right? And of course you are throwing a party, but you forgot. But you don't want them to know because it's a surprise, right? So you say, no, I don't. There's no party. You're feigning. You are feigning ignorance, right? You're pretending not to know. So I want to pretend to be a service API. So I can use reservation client, and I'll say collection of reservation, get reservations. And I think actually somebody I talked to here, I think it was here, 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, somebody even asked me about this particular feature. So I wish that person was here. He got so mad at me because I didn't quite see the value of it. And that's because I'm dumb. And he was really smart, and I'm sorry, wherever he is. So feign client, reservation service. So I'm saying talk to this service in the registry. Same thing, it's going to do client-side load balancing. And then I'll say request mapping, and this is a little weird. I'm going to use server-side mapping types on my client interface. So I'm going to say method equals request method dot get value equals reservations. Okay, and I can do things like the media type and all that stuff. And if I had a path variable, I could say ID path variable ID long ID, right? Whatever. But I'm going to leave that out since I don't. So now reservations, and now I have a client from my REST API. And there's a big debate, if you have a service API, do you write the client for the API, or does some other team do that? Okay. Is it automatically generated? Is that why?
It is published as the client job.
Sorry? Say that again?
The server team will publish its interface as a client job.
Right.
And I can write the GAV for in my phone.
Cool. Okay, so that's cool. A lot of teams do that, and a lot of teams say no, I don't want to write the client, and the reason is because I'm scared that if I write the client and the service, I will make assumptions. I will do logic in the client that should be in the service. Right? So Amazon, they build only APIs. They let the community build the clients. That way, it's a clean room, guarantees there's no magic, no extra logic in the client that should not be there. But whatever choice, I think this is a nice compromise. Here, you can write the client API, but you don't do a lot of work. You're just defining an interface. So it's very simple to publish a client jar. So okay, here we go. I'm going to say client reservation client, and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say @enable Feign client. Okay? And I'm going to go down and I'm going to say, okay, @bean command line runner FC feign a reservation client, right? RC. I'll say args rc.getReservations.forEach. There we go. So now if I run this code, hello. Sorry. Okay, show that, stop and run. We should see the same data twice, and then the discovery client output once, right? So there it is. There's the reservation service once. I'm not sure if that's feign or if that's the REST template, but either way, it's one or the other. Here's the discovery client, and here's the other one using feign or REST template. So now these are, very low level, medium, and then very high level. Like you don't even know you're dealing with HTTP with feign, So it doesn't matter which you choose. The benefit is that you get load balancing automatically. It's very, very easy to work with this stuff. It's easy to set it up. Part of the reason that people say, oh, I don't want to do microservices is because they worry about the complexity of talking to other services and getting it right. Well, of course, a lot of that is gone now, right? You don't even have to worry about that in some cases. Now, okay, this is a pure client, of course. This is just calling another service. But again, what I want to do is I want to build a service that an actual client can talk to, like an iPhone or an Android or whatever. So that is called an edge service. It may be that all I need to do is proxy my services. Maybe I have an HTML5 application, and the HTML5 application cannot talk to different hosts and ports. But I do need to talk to those services, so I can just expose them as a proxy. So to do that, I'll use Zool @enable Zool proxy. Okay. Zool is, I'm not sure I can show you. Zool by Bing. Come on. Can somebody help me? We're so close, yet so far. So Zool is the monster in the movie Ghostbusters. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but it's the monster in Ghostbusters that is the keeper of the door that goes to the underworld, right? Zool is the gatekeeper. So it's the thing that guards the door into your services. Thank you for your help, man. Welcome. Okay. So Bing.com. Come on, faster. Zool. Images. There we are. That's Zool. Right.
It's like Japanese anime?
No, it's a movie called Ghostbusters. It was in the 80s, 20, 30 years ago. It's really funny if you get a chance. They're making a new one. This is such a classic movie, and it's Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and a lot of great funny actors. But now they're doing a new one. It's coming out soon. It's all women. It's going to be hilarious. I cannot wait. No, because the actors that they're hiring are really, really, really good. So I can't wait. I love Ghostbusters, and now it's going to be because in the never mind. Anyway, there's a whole stock. We should talk about it later. I'm a big fan of Ghostbusters, and I can't wait for the new one. So anyway, that's Zool, and we're going to use that as a proxy. So I'm going to run this. Again, remember what you might do. I'm going to build a edge service for each client, right? For my Android app, I'll build an edge service and then deploy it. And the Android app will talk specifically to that edge service, right? The edge service will be exposed via DNS, not service registration and discovery. The iPhone client, the HTML5 client. So maybe this is an HTML5 app specifically. This is the edge service that is exposed to my HTML5 app, and it has security settings here, right? I can add HTTP basic or OAuth or whatever, and it's only for this edge service. And then the edge service talks to everything in the back end, right? So the edge service has to be very defensive because it is the door into your data center, into your firewall. So you have to make sure that you don't overflow your services. So it's important to have smart software here. So we're going to say, okay, 8050, and I'm going to say reservation service, reservations. So reservation service is the name of the service in the registry. If I have another service called foo service, then I can call it that way, right? So I'm not calling the reservation service directly. Remember, the reservation service lives here, port 8000. So 8000, and then 8050, right? So it's a proxy. And maybe that's enough. For JavaScript, I cannot call different hosts and ports, but that's okay. I can call them all from here. Maybe that's enough, and you're done. You just add some security and write your client, and you move on. Maybe you want to transform or collect or merge the data. Maybe the client needs a view of the data that is different than what you have as individual services, right? You want to take two different streams of data and join them together, right? So that's another very common use case. And so we're going to build that kind of service. We're going to build a API gateway. So it's an edge service that talks to other APIs and transforms the results. Okay, so I'm going to say class reservation names REST controller. All I'm going to do is transform the names from my reservations. I'm going to get the reservations and just return the names without the JSON. Okay, very simple transformation, not particularly useful, but it'll help us demonstrate a few things. So I'll say REST controller, okay, and I'll say request mapping names collection string names return, and then I'll I need to return the collection of names. Now, of course, I could just inject my feign client, right? My feign client, I could say private reservation client like this, and I could just say, okay, this dot reservation client dot get reservations dot stream dot map reservation. I'm going to say for each R, call reservation dot get reservation name dot collect collectors to list. And I'm using Java 8 functional programming features. This thing where I'm creating a stupid, it's a little weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a method reference syntax. So I could just say reservation. Okay. So I'm actually mapping it. I'm saying call this method for each one and give me a list. And so I'm creating a list of strings. But again, in this case, I suffer from the same problem that we had earlier. If the feign service makes a call to my service registry and there are 0 instances, it's going to fall down. It's going to throw up. It works if there's 1 or 100, but if there's 0, then it doesn't work. So, and remember, this is our edge service. This is what our client will see. So we can't just throw an exception and let them see it. It has to do something useful. So we're going to write a little bit of integration code. We're going to say at component class reservation integration. And here I'm going to write some logic to be a little bit more sophisticated in handling the error. Okay, so I'm going to take this code. Okay. Okay. At request mapping, at collection of string get reservation names. Okay. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to inject my feign client, just as last time. But now I want to take some care to make sure that I handle my scenario where things aren't, where things don't work. So I'm going to use the integration here. Integration, and I'll say return this dot integration dot get reservation names. I want to make sure that if something goes wrong, I catch the exception and do something useful anyway, right? And to support this, I'm going to use the circuit breaker pattern. Circuit breaker. So a circuit breaker in English, you know how if you have a house or a building and there's too much electricity, and if the too much electricity causes a fire, it explodes and there's a fire, right? In a modern house, like here in China, all these new buildings, and in some places in America, you have circuit breakers, which if there's too much electricity, it opens the circuit. So instead of sending all the data, all the electricity through the circuits all the time and causing a fire, it opens the circuit and nothing goes through. Yeah, it's bad because yes, maybe I lose my lights. The lights go off because there's no electricity. But at least I have a house, right? I'd much rather keep the house standing than have it on fire, right? So it's about keeping damage. It's about keeping or limiting damage in your systems. It's about keeping state. So I'm gonna integrate the Hystrix circuit breaker. So @enable circuit breaker, and I'm gonna say Hystrix command fallback method. And again, I need to call another method. Which method do I call, right? Well, I can call get reservations names fallback. Okay. And I'm going to say public collection string. And of course, I can do whatever I want here, right? I can return an empty array list if I want. I can do something useful, like Netflix. What they do is they'll say, okay, well maybe the search engine is down, but they'll return recommendations. So it's doing something. Maybe the search doesn't work, but it still says, oh well, here's some recommendations from other people on the web right now. So you get useful results. They degrade gracefully, graceful degradation. It's very important. There's a person named Fred George out of the UK who gives a talk about microservices, and he talks about the human body is a microservice system. He says, if I cut my finger, I don't blue screen, right? Like, you got to keep working. Like, if this stops working, it's going to bleed a little bit, but I'll be okay, you know? Your system should be the same. If you cut the finger, it should be a little bit of blood, but you're okay, right? So keep the damage limited. So I'm going to say, okay, call this if this fails, if this throws an exception. And this Hystrix command is also going to it's going to stop access to this method for a little while. Maybe a minute, maybe 30 seconds. And then it'll try again afterwards. So if you call this a million times, it'll fail the first time, and then every time after that for a little while, it call the fallback, right? And then it'll try again, and so on. So it backs off, okay? Here we go. And now if I go to my endpoint, names, there's my data, right? And by the way, this code right here, I'm using feign, and I'm calling one service. But again, imagine a more useful service maybe takes two services and takes the data and creates a composite, or merges the data together. This is a perfect place to do reactive programming, right? Right here is where you would use something like RxJava, right? RxJava, right? And the reason you want to do that is so you can merge. You can say call this service at the same time, and then when the data comes back, merge it together. And you could do this with regular threading, but it's really, really painful. Reactive programming makes it very easy to write basically imperative code, but have it execute concurrently. So it's a configuration detail instead of all the logic, right? So reactive programming is very nice here. Now, I've only got one service, so I'm just using a straight imperative thing. But, anyway, so now what happens if I remove my reservation service, right? So this service is here, but what happens if I go back to my reservation service here and kill it? Fail, right? This is going to fail, but it drops back to 0. It drops back to the empty array list immediately. And I can see that if I, call this service, it's not stalling, it's not hesitating. It immediately returns the array list. It falls back. It would be nice to be able to visualize and see all of what's happening here. So I'm going to go back to my start.spring.io, and I'll stand up one more thing. Come on, please work. There we go. Hystrix dashboard. So the dashboard here, config client Hystrix dashboard, and I'll hit generate. Okay, show in Finder. Command V. Good. So there's my example application, same thing as before, @enable Hystrix dashboard. And I'm going to do the same as before. I'll say bootstrap.properties, Command A, and I'll say Hystrix dashboard. Great. Okay. Good. And I'll restart this again. And that'll start up, and it'll be available as a tool I can use to visualize what is happening. I want to see where in my system I have circuits that may break. So I go to localhost. I think it's 8050 or 8080. I don't know. Let's see. No. 63919. Sure. Is that working? Bootstrap.properties. Hystrix dashboard. Okay. Whatever. So I'll talk to this, and there, that image is loaded from the internet. So this is a porcupine. So this is going to monitor the circuit in my system. I want to be able to see if something needs help. So I want to see that if something is going wrong on the names endpoint, I want to see that and be able to, I want to say, oh, look, somebody should be woken up, somebody should help. There is a stream of data that Hystrix, which is what that circuit breaker is using, creates. So the stream of data is never ending, right? It's a heartbeat. And I want this stream of data to be monitored, so I'll put it here. Okay. I hit monitor, and I get this little dashboard thingy. Okay. So I go to 8050 names. And you can see, look, it's red, and so on. So if I go back to reservation service, eventually this will spin up, and it'll be available, and I can actually watch the traffic come back. So give it a second. It takes like 30 seconds. So this is red. It's a moving average, right? It's moving average. It's showing that there's no traffic going through. So the circuit is open. It's always calling the fallback, right? In time, it'll see that I've added the service, and it'll heal. So as soon as that service is available in the registry, we see the client, but not the reservation service. So as soon as the service is here, then the dashboard itself will also pick it up eventually, right? So we'll give it like, there's a service again. By the way, there's the red arrows I was telling you about earlier. So the service is here, and now if I go to this one, does it work yet? We don't know. Circuit is still closed, still open, so there's no traffic going through. And we should see in a little bit of time, by the way, I'm making a lot of requests right now. So there you go. And now it's closed on the right. So the traffic is working again. So it's a moving average of the requests. So the system is healing itself, and I can visualize all that, and I can see what's happening. I can visualize all of the circuits and all of my services on one screen using Turbine. So Turbine is a way of taking this stream, and that stream, and putting it in one place, and then I can visualize that with my dashboard. So we haven't really gotten a chance to talk about a lot. I'm sorry. I feel like we should, if we had more time. But there's a lot of stuff here. A lot, right? And I didn't get to talk about security. So we have OAuth, great OAuth support. You can actually say, for each microservice, you can say, you need an identity provider token, an access token. And the access token can come from any OAuth service. We have an OAuth service you can use. It's open source. It's called Spring Security OAuth. And you can it's a couple annotations. You can talk to anything that Spring Security can talk to. And then for each of your services, you can say, if somebody makes a call to you, make sure they pass in a access token. and get that access token, validate it from this authorization service. That's one thing that's very, that's the Spring Cloud security. You mentioned distributed tracing, right? So we're actually working on this right now, and we would love some help. So if you go to GitHub Spring Cloud, is it here? That's me. So sleuth, no, Spring Cloud, sleuth, there you go, incubator, right? So Spring Cloud Sleuth is in the incubator. And this is a distributed tracing system for exactly the kind of thing you were mentioning earlier. So we would love to make sure that your use cases are met, that we satisfy what you're trying to do. Maybe we can share code. That's what I'm here for today. I hope you will consider using some of this stuff. I know that you are building systems that use a lot of these patterns already. You have to. You're building one of the biggest websites in the world. Netflix, a lot of the stuff is from Netflix, right? Netflix is also one of the biggest websites in the world. Huge. In fact, in the West, Netflix is so popular that in the evening, when people in the United States are done with dinner and they go to their TV after work, they sit in front of their TV, they watch Netflix. During that time, 80% of all internet traffic in the world is Netflix. Seriously, it's crazy. They're 200% bigger than YouTube. So Netflix, on the internet, in terms of streaming, there is pornography, then Netflix, then YouTube, right? Huge system. So they have to scale to crazy, crazy scale, like you do. And so a lot of these things came from their best practices, and we work with them. They're using Spring Boot, and now they're using Spring Cloud. We're also providing things that they don't open source or that other companies have not open sourced. That's why we're trying to make this work. It's very pluggable, as you see, right? We support service registration, but we don't care if you use Eureka or Console or Zookeeper or whatever. What do you use, for example? See what I'm saying? What I want to have a discussion about is, A, could some of this stuff work for you? B, I want to help write the integrations. Maybe there's some things that you do that are not open source and you want to write the integrations to make it work. That's not hard. We could do that. C, are there some places where this stuff could work, but it needs some work? It needs a little bit of changing for you to make it work at your scale and your use cases, right? And I think we have a chance here to build something amazing, to build something that is the best platform for building applications in the cloud at your scale, at anybody's scale, right? The nice thing about being Alibaba is that you had to solve a lot of these problems. You had to figure them out. You had to provide answers already years ago. So did Netflix, so did Google, so did Amazon and eBay and so on, right? These companies had to solve these already. But now, today, we have a unique opportunity, right? If I'm on my iPhone and I build anything, it doesn't even have to be very good. It just has to make people happy. It can become very, very popular overnight. And of course, we used to talk about capacity planning. We used to say, oh, well, if I have this much sales during the holiday, during double sticks day, is that what you call it, right? 11/11, right? If I have too many sales during that day, what will I do? I should build my data center to have this many computers for that day. And then the rest of the year, those computers were wasted. Well, with the cloud now, that's not really true anymore, is it? I can use those services. I can repurpose the machines. I can make them do different things. And so if you have an app on your phone or if you build something on Facebook or Weibo or something that uses these social platforms, you can go huge overnight, regular people. And so we at Pivotal believe that cloud computing, along with technology like this, are what enable people to move faster, right? And they're taken together. There's a new architecture, and so a lot of the big giants like you have already figured out some of these patterns, right? And some of these other companies have done the same. And a lot of the things look kind of the same. Circuit breaker is pretty common. I'll bet you probably have something like that. The configuration management, I'll bet you have something kind of like that that could work. The service registration and all this stuff. Again, it's all kind of the same, right? We have common patterns here. And it would be nice to distribute tracing. This is a common problem. You see what I'm saying? So what I want to do is I want to see if there's a way to make this something that could work for you. B, find ways to make it so that you have less code to maintain, right? We're trying to build a very, very powerful platform here. So what do you think? Did you guys like it? No? Maybe?
Yes.
So I know that you were expecting, I did a bad job last time, and I'm sorry. But I don't know what you were expecting when you saw that I was coming, but I'm hoping this was much better, right? Can we work together? I mean, I would love some help, you know? This is our biggest Spring project. Spring Boot is crazy popular now. Spring Boot is every month, more than 1 million downloads for just Spring Boot. Remember, there are only 7 million Java developers in the world. So that's a lot, right? It's the second most popular Spring technology outside of Spring. And you need Spring to build Spring Boot, so, right? A lot of people are using it. It's very, very popular. It's obviously very productive, right? And Spring Cloud as well is now becoming, it's newer, so it's not as productive, not as popular, but it's very, very popular. And the mechanism that we're using, this auto configuration, it would not be hard. Imagine like instead of me, if I go here, instead of having @Spring, imagine I take @enable discovery client, or over here, where's my reservation service? No, client. There. If I go here, I say, oh, well, look, I need this, this, and this, and this, right? There's actually an annotation called Spring Cloud application. And this annotation, boot, discovery, circuit breaker, and Zool. See, it's got boot, circuit breaker, and discovery, right? I want to help you guys build @enable, Alibaba service, right? You just add that to the class, and these concerns get automatically added for you, and it's just meta-annotated with all these. It has all these, and it has the right integrations for your platform. So I hope we can we chat now? I would love to. I know we have. What is the schedule? You're the boss. What are we doing?
We just to help them. We just our lunch.
Sorry?
Our lunch together.
Okay, I'd love
So
to.
we can check out together.
Okay, so are you guys okay to come back afterwards? Let's talk after lunch,
No
problem.
please. Okay, I would like you to show me what you can. If you can't, that's okay. But I would like to learn what you're doing, and maybe we can find places where this stuff can help, I know you guys have a very advanced system, but it is based on Spring, and it is, by the way, easy. This is just Spring, so I can do @import resource old context.xml, so you can move to the new stuff. You don't have to throw away everything. It's not like a whole thing, right? So, okay. So good. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your time. Oh, and this video, do you have a USB key? I want you to tell other people about what we saw here, please.
We should share this video.
I'm gonna. That's why I'm recording it.
You have a record, right?
I'm saving it. Yep.
好的。